Hello, ladies and gentlemen. As most of you know, I'm Donna Peterson, and I do these presentations. I have 6 for women of the Civil War. I have 1 for Abraham Lincoln, which is my favorite, and I have nuns and priests in the Civil War, but of course that's a limited audience. And then I have women of World War II, which I presented here for the Greenbelt Museum, and I'm working on women of World War II too. So, and then I'm going to start on women of the Wild West. This has really been a wonderful project for me. Since I'm not at Dr. Mudd's anymore, I was at Dr. Mudd's for 25 years, and now I need something to do, so I found this. I mean, I still work full-time, but what I'm going to talk about are stories of brave and courageous women of early America from the mid-1800s to the turn of the century. All were high-spirited pioneers who left conventional roles behind to venture into the unknown and make a path for today's women everywhere. First on our list is a popular one, Calamity Jane. Can you see Mary? Okay. She was born Mary Jane Canary, and she was best known for being a frontierswoman, and she was also well known for being the wife of Wild Bill Hickok, who I kept confusing Buffalo Bill Cody with Wild Bill Hickok. And although Wild Bill Hickok was in the shows that Buffalo Bill put on, he traveled, he started in the 1870s and went throughout Europe, even performing and they brought Indians with them, and it was a big hit over in England. And he had, Queen Victoria was just mesmerized with that. But that's Buffalo Bill Cody. So anyway, she had, they met in the wild towns of Deadwood, South Dakota, and she had earned her nickname after working for the military and being engaged in numerous battles with Native Americans. She joined Bill's show as a storyteller, but eventually passed away due to her struggle with alcoholism. Oh. Carlotta Tompkins, who's also known as Lottie Deno, a Kentucky native. She was a notorious gambler who had a masterful poker skills and was famous throughout the West. She honed her skill in Europe and came back to the U.S., where she met and married fellow gambler Frank Thurman. He was wanted in Georgia for murder, though, so they escaped to San Antonio, where she became the ultimate poker player and associated herself with other Wild West gamblers, such as Doc Holliday. It is said she was the inspiration for the character of Miss Kitty Russell on Gunsmoke. Abigail Scott Duniway, born in the Midwest, in March of 1852, her family wanted to go to the Wild West with 30 people and 5 ox-drawn wagons. They immigrated to Oregon, but her mother and brother died along the way. In October, they arrived in Oregon. She married and had 6 children. Since her husband was disabled in an accident, she became the sole support, started businesses, and she campaigned for women's rights. She wrote books about her experience on the Oregon Trail and was the first woman to register to vote in Multnomah, County, Oregon. Sarah Winnemucca. She was called the Sagebrush Princess. Born in Nevada to an influential Paiute family who had friendly relations with the arriving groups of Anglos coming out west. She went to Catholic school in California, and she began working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs as an interpreter. She subsequently became an advocate for Native American rights and telling about the plight of her people. She published her memoirs in the history of her culture, and she founded schools for Native American children. In 2005, the state of Nevada contributed a statue of her to the National Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol. And I also want to tell you that I have a book on every one of my women where I got my information from. If you want to further look into, one or more particular women, you can have a look at the book and see who you want to further study. Now, these are two women that were involved in the tyranny of polygamy. First was Fanny Stenhouse. She was an early Mormon pioneer who defected from the LDS Church and was most famous for her 1872 publication, Expose of Polygamy in Utah, A Lady's Life Among the Mormons, a record of personal experience as a wife of a Mormon elder. The other lady was Anne, and she was one of Brigham Young's 54 wives. And later a critic of polygamy. Her autobiography, Wife Number 19, was a recollection of her experiences, and she was married and divorced 3 times, but she was excommunicated eventually after her book was published by the LDS Church. Big Nose Kate. This is my favorite. This is Mary Catherine Heroni. She was a Hungarian-born American prostitute. Not that that was my favorite. And a longtime companion and the common law wife of Old West gunfighter Doc Holliday. She ran away from her family, married a dentist, had a child, but they both died, so she made her way to St. Louis. She entered a convent, the Ursuline convent, but she didn't remain long before she started working as a sporting woman in a sporting house. And then she was arrested. She moved to Texas where she met Holliday. They then moved to Tombstone. When he died in 1887, she married again in Colorado, but he became an abusive alcoholic, so they divorced. She later in her life, she lived in the Arizona Pioneers Home. Now I'm going to stop right now and tell you something about Doc Holliday. He was a dentist that grew up in Georgia, and he was, of course, we know him as the Wild West guy. But before he got out there, he had a big family, lots of cousins, but he ultimately fell in love with one of his first cousins. And even back then, that was frowned upon. Her name was Mary Melanie Holliday. So they were both, very excited about each other, but then they knew they couldn't marry. So Mary Melanie went into the convent, and she became a Mother Superior, very, popular. And he took his broken heart and went out west. And you know how family stories are talked about down through the generations? Well, their second cousin, once removed, was writing a book, and she knew about this love affair that was ill-fated, so she started writing about that, put that into her book, and but in her book, the 2 cousins got married. The book is Gone with the Wind, and the author is Margaret Mitchell. And she was the second cousin once removed from, not her, but Mary Melanie, who I have a picture of, Mary Melanie Holliday and Doc Holliday. And that's the rest of the story. Okay, next. Mary Fields. She was called Stagecoach Mary. And we knew when she was born, but I didn't know when she died. But she was one of the toughest and bravest women in American history. She was born a slave and was freed after the Civil War. She worked in convents in Ohio and Montana, where she became notorious for drinking, smoking, and toting guns. So I think they didn't like that. But in 1895, she became the first African-American female star route mail carrier by Stagecoach. She was noted for her speed and reliability and was fearless in the face of Stagecoach thieves. It was rumored that she fought off a pack of wild wolves with her rifle alone. Pretty cool. Okay, this is, no, not yet. Okay, Pearl Hart. She was a Canadian outlaw who committed one of the last recorded stagecoach robberies in the American West. While living in Arizona, she teamed up with an outlaw named Joe Boot, and together they decided to rob stagecoaches. The pair stole what would be about $12,000 today, but were quickly caught and sent to jail. Word spread of the female stagecoach robber, and she was the only woman inmate in the Yuma Territorial Prison. She was given a large cell with a yard and frequently posed for pictures and regularly granted interviews to reporters. After her release, she worked for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show under an alias, but ultimately she disappeared from the public. Rose Dunn. She was called the Rose of Cimarron. She was born in Oklahoma to a very poor family, and they were outlaws by the time she was 12. But she did receive a formal education at a convent, but she also learned to rope, ride, and shoot from her brothers, who were known bounty hunters. She fell in love with outlaw George Bitter Creek Newcomb, who rode with the infamous Wild Bunch gang. She was even involved in a shootout against a group of U.S. Marshals, and her short outlaw life launched her into the level of Western legend. Leaving behind her outlaw life, she was married twice and had no children. Now I have another thing about George. He did something. Let me see what he did. Okay. He was Bitter Creek. He made his way to Oklahoma. He rode with the Dalton gang, the Doolin gang, and on the Dunn Ranch of the Cinnamon River to visit Newcomb's lover, the famous Rose of Cimarron. He was ambushed at one point and shot out of his saddle by Rose's brothers, who wanted to collect the large bounty on their heads. So yeah, poor girl. Okay, this is Maddie Silks. She was born in Pennsylvania. She started her life as a prostitute in Texas, and you're going to find a lot of these women, until she became madam of the brothel in Illinois at the age of 19. And she was one of the best known madams in the West, where the demand for women was high due to the gold rush. At one point, she and another madam, Kate Fulton, had the first recorded duel between two women. It was over the same man, wouldn't you know? Cortez Thompson was a local businessman. Both women missed their targets, but Maddie struck a bystander, none other than Cortez. He was there to watch them fight over him, injuring him slightly. Silks was known as the Queen of Denver's red light district. She died from complications due to a fall. Jenny Rogers, she was from Pennsylvania, and she left her poor upbringing to become one of the most famous madams in the West. Her successful brothel was called the House of Mirrors. She had quite a temper, and standing 6 feet tall, she never hesitated to use her stature to ruthlessly intimidate and blackmail businessmen that had visited her soiled doves. That's what they called the women, soiled doves. Jenny went as far as going to bury a human skull in the backyard of one of her clients. When discovered, the man faced legal prosecution or hand over a ton of hush money to Jenny. The man paid Jenny the money, and only the most beautiful girls, fine dining, best musicians, and bartenders and gamblers were ever at her brothel. Susan Shelby McGoffin, originally from Kentucky, she was the wife of a trader who traveled the Santa Fe Trail. She kept a diary of their experiences making their way across the difficult land. They suffered hardships, but they kept on to find a new life. The diary of Susan McGoffin and Down the Santa Fe Trail into Mexico are among her books. Ella Cara Deloria. She was born on an Indian reservation in South Dakota. She became an educator, anthropologist, ethnographer, linguist, and novelist. She recorded Native American oral history and contributed to the study of Native American languages. She was one of the first truly bilingual figures in American anthropology. She also worked with Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict, and she never married. Come on. Here, no, it's going too far. Aunt Clara Brown. She was a former enslaved woman from Virginia who became a community leader, philanthropist, and aided the settlement of former slaves during the Colorado Gold Rush. She married another enslaved person, and they had 4 children. The family was broken apart, and all were sold to different slave owners. When she was 56, she received her freedom, and she made her way to Colorado, where she worked as a cook and a laundress. She worked and saved her money to travel back to Kentucky to find her family. Finally, in 1882, she found a daughter, Eliza Jane. In 1885, she was voted into the Society of Colorado Pioneers. This is Mary Austin. She looks kind of tough. She was one of the early nature writers of the American Southwest. She was born in Illinois, and her family moved to San Joaquin Valley, California, when she graduated from Blackburn College in 1888. She married Stanford Austin, a graduate of UC Berkeley. And who knew that it was there at that time? She was a prolific novelist, poet, critic, playwright, early feminist, and defender of Native American and Spanish American rights. Toby Riddle. She was born in Nanudua, which means strange child, because she was born with red tinted hair. She married a white settler named Frank Riddle, and together they had a son named Jeff. Her and Frank served as interpreters to the Peace Commission appointed in 1873 to settle the Modoc War. Yeah, Mary Ellen Pleasant. She was a 19th century entrepreneur, financier, real estate magnate, and abolitionist. And she was without a doubt the first self-made African-American millionaire. She identified herself as a capitalist by profession. And in the 1890 census, her aim was to earn as much money as she was able to help as many people as she could. She worked with the Underground Railroad, and she supported John Brown. Her abusive first husband left her thousands when he died, and she was called the mother of human rights. She made a fortune in the gold rush, shattering racial taboos. Laura Gilpin, now I put her in, she's not so much in the Wild West, but she was known for her photographs of Native Americans, particularly the Navajo and Pueblo and southwestern landscapes. For her 12th birthday, she received a Kodak Brownie camera and took off from there. Annie Oakley. Born Phoebe Ann Mosey, she became Annie Oakley, an American sharpshooter who starred in the Buffalo Bills Wild West show. She developed hunting skills to provide for her impoverished family in Ohio, and at 15 she won a shooting contest against experienced marksman Frank Butler, whom she later married in 1876. The pair joined Buffalo Bills shows in 1885, performing all over Europe. After a bad rail accident in 1901, she had to settle for a less taxing routine, so she instructed women in marksmanship. Her stage acts were filmed for Thomas Edison's earliest kinetoscope in 1894. Annie Get Your Gun is her story. Sadie Orchard. She was an English-born stagecoach driver that was a legendary personality in southwestern New Mexico. She supposedly arrived in Kingston in the 1880s as a prostitute and soon ascended to management, where she moved to Hillsborough in 1893, where she married the owner of the regional stagecoach line. She established herself as a successful entrepreneur in the hotel business, and she ran a brothel on Virtue Street. And she used the profits to build the first church in Kingston, New Mexico. She put it to good cause. Madame Dora Dufran, the Black Hills leading madam. She was born in England and she immigrated to Nebraska. And looking good in her youth, she moved to Rapid City, where she became a dance hall girl and eventually promoting herself to madam soon enough. After moving to Deadwood, she married Joseph Dufran, a gentleman gambler, who not only wasn't bothered by her profession, but helped her grow her business. She also became a friend and employer to Calamity Jane. She had a heart of gold, always helping the needy. She expanded her brothels in Deadwood, calling one of them Diddling Dora's. Jessie Benton Fremont, she was in my Ladies of the Civil War because she was a socialite in Washington. And she grew up in DC. She went to Georgetown, and her father educated her like he would a man, because she wanted her to go far. She married a Civil War hero, John C. Fremont, who Fremont, California is named after him. After the war, they moved west to explore the new territories in America, and she began writing about their experiences, and they settled in San Francisco, where John began his political career. She had 5 children, supported her husband's appointment to senator in the new state of California. She was outspoken on political issues and a determined opponent of slavery. When her husband died, she settled in Los Angeles, but an accident left her an invalid. Lozin. Lozin was a warrior and prophet of the Apache Nation. She was able to use her powers in battle to learn the movements of the enemy. She was as strong as a man, braver than most, and she was cunning in strategy. She was a shield to her people. She fought against the American forces in Victoria's War in 1879, and she inspired women and children frozen in fear to cross the Rio Grande. She could ride, shoot, and fight like a man. Taken into U.S. military custody after Geronimo's surrender, she was a POW in Alabama with other Apache warriors. She died in confinement from tuberculosis. Helen Jane Stewart. She was an Illinois native who became a Southern Nevada pioneer and was considered to be the First Lady of Las Vegas. Stewart Street in downtown Las Vegas is dedicated in her honor. She had 5 children when her husband was killed by a neighbor. With her father's help, she bought up many properties in anticipation of the railroad coming. So she knew that would make a fortune. In 1893, she became the first postmaster of Las Vegas. And though the name was spelled L-O-S Vegas until 1903, I never knew that. I thought it was Las Vegas. She was the first woman elected to the Clark County School Board, and she donated the land for the first public school attended by Native American children. This is Grace Hudson. She was an American painter who was nationally known for her more than 684 portraits of local Pomo Indians. She was born in California, and she attended the recently established San Francisco School of Design. At 16, she did an award-winning, full-length, life-size self-portrait in crayon. She eloped with an older man and upset her parents, but it only lasted a year. She married a doctor in 1890 who shared her keen interest in painting Native Americans. They had no children, but they lived a bohemian lifestyle in San Francisco together until their deaths. Now, she started the hippie movement in California, a bohemian in San Francisco, who'd have thunk? Lily Langtree. She was born in Europe, and she became a popular actress known for her amazing beauties. She is the most famous today for being the obsession of the hanging Judge Roy Bean, and he was known to go lenient if you spoke highly of Miss Langtry. He named his town in Texas, Langtry, after her. Any movie which has Judge Bean in it always mentions Lily Langtry. She married 3 times, had 1 daughter. Queen Victoria's son, Prince Leopold, hung her portrait over his bed. The Queen was not amused. She was the inspiration, this is the coolest thing. She was the inspiration for The Who, you know The Who, the group, for their 1967 hit, Pictures of Lily. Who knew? Laura Bullion. While the exact details of her birth and early life are unclear, as Laura was best known for being a member of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch group gang. She was involved in the Great Northern Train robbery, which led to her arrest in 1901. Known as Della Rose, or the Rose of the Wild Bunch, she was the last surviving member of the Wild Bunch gang, passing away in 1961. So she lived a long life. Eleanor Dumont, also known as Madame Mustache. Eleanor was one of the most notorious gamblers during her time, especially during the gold rush. She had traveled all over making a living for herself playing cards. She eventually owned a gambling parlor, and it was called Vin et Un in Nevada City, where no women were allowed except her. And Vin et Un is the predecessor to blackjack, and that's what she named it after. It was an incredible, successful gambling spot, and she later joined forces with another gambler, Dave Tobin, to open up the equally profitable Dumont's Place. When the gold dried up, she left and traveled from place to place, where she always drew a crowd to watch her poker skills. Lillian Frances Smith. She was another trick shooter who joined Buffalo Bill's show when she was just 15. She became known as the champion California huntress, as well as the rival of Annie Oakley. The two were initially not on good terms, and after a bad performance against Oakley in front of Queen Victoria, Lillian received negative press and eventually decided to leave the show. After relocating to Oklahoma, she joined the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch Wild West show and performed in other local shows like Pawnee Bill's show. She continued to be a record-setting shooter until her death in 1930. Lillian Russell, an American actress and singer known for her flamboyant personal life as well as her beauty and voice. Educated in Catholic schools in Chicago, her mother brought her to New York to find fame and fortune. She married in 1884, only to have it annulled when her husband was arrested for bigamy. 2 of her other 3 marriages ended in divorce, and she was a frequent companion of tycoon Diamond Jim Brady. For a generation of women, she was the feminine ideal incarnate. And after she retired, she wrote for women's pages about beauty tips. And I want to tell you, Diamond Jim Brady even had diamonds sewn into his underwear. Belle Starr, queen of the Oklahoma Outlaws. Belle was an American outlaw who gained notoriety only after her violent death. She rode with the James Younger Gang and other outlaws. She married a Cherokee named Sam Starr, and they settled in the Indian Territory, and it was there she learned to bootleg, steal horses, and rustle cattle. She and Sam were arrested in 1883 and put in prison to serve 9 months. She was an ideal inmate. In contrast, Sam was incorrigible. In 1886, Sam was in a gunfight and was killed. She then married his cousin, Jim July Starr. in 1889, after attending a dance in which she turned down an intoxicated Edgar Watson when he asked her to dance, he then followed her home and ambushed her and shot her dead. And that's my last one. I'm going to be doing Women of the Wild West too, so I'm sure I'll come back and show you all, and I hope you enjoyed it. Do you have any questions?
So it seems like all they had out in the Wild West were brothels and convents?
Yeah.
And you went from one to the other?
I know, I wanted to diversify. Give equal rights to the prostitutes and the nuns.
But it seemed like the same people were going back and forth between the brothel and the convent. Like
Yeah.
they left the
I
brothel.
know, that's how it ended up. You know, if one didn't work, the other one went somewhere else. Okay, all right. Stay tuned for part 2.